All right, I think now I've got Jacky on the line. Jacky is, of course, our technical director over in our Vancouver office, and he's really the person who's in charge of running our AutoQuote 3D widget throughout the entire operation, so including Vancouver and Mississauga. So, Jacky, how's it going?
It's going fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today. So I wanted to actually get a little bit of experience from your perspective on running AutoQuote 3D for Shop 3D and how you've kind of set that all up and basically your experiences with using the widget with our operation. So tell us a little bit about how you run our PTO print to order requests.
Yeah, so currently we have it set up really conveniently as two locations. So as you know, we have a physical store in both Vancouver and Mississauga, Ontario. So we run AutoQuote on basically two threads separately. So that what that allows us to do is basically separate the orders from the different locations and also set different prices and also have different equipment set up. So with the two different locations, we have different materials available, we have different printers available. So it's really important for us to be able to separate all those things so that, if someone orders a part that we can't produce in Vancouver, then that causes a lot of communication problems with the customer, a lot more friction. So we want to make sure that we can customize each side to ensure that both we can essentially make the parts quickly in the right locations, and then people can choose as well. They can choose which side they want it on, and then we can produce those parts really quickly, efficiently. And the whole point of the AutoQuote system is to reduce friction on both the back end, how we create things, and for the customer. So by customizing these two locations, we're able to be a lot more efficient and a lot more hands-off on the manual quoting.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm looking at your screen and I'm really jealous because you got the new Form 4L back there, which is a
Yeah.
lot of build volume for your SLA technology. We don't have that here. We do have the older 3L, but I think you actually get a lot more orders on your for printing on your 4L than we do on our 3L, right?
Yeah, we get a ton of printing on the 4L. It's really popular because I think, as you said, not a lot of people have access to a large SLA, and something so reliable and has access to such a great library of materials. It's a really popular machine right now. A lot of people already have standard FDM, standard SLA, but when it comes to larger SLA printers, that's a lot less common, and that's where people start to look for external third-party companies to be able to produce their parts for them.
Gotcha. And let me ask you about a practical experience. Since we've kind of separated into two locations and there's two different teams working on it, how did you? I guess you could assign different users to different teams. And what happens if you have one material on one side and one printer on the other? Like, how do you manage both of those locations? And if we have a third location down the line, how would you manage that also?
Yeah, so it's super easy. You can essentially just add a new company, and it shows up on the drop-down list. So you can actually just select whether it's Vancouver or Mississauga. So me as the overall manager, I can look at both stores. They have independent stats and they have independent printer and material setups. So you can manage all that stuff on the fly individually. And people can go in and check it out. So if somebody has access to both Vancouver and Mississauga locations, they can make quotes from either location. So in some odd cases where maybe we don't have a material available in Vancouver, Mississauga has that available, then they can actually just swap over, and then we can quote the job from the Mississauga side instead of the Vancouver, and vice versa, and then we can cross ship. It's not ideal that way, but that option is available so that we don't lose the customer because we don't have that material in stock.
Yeah, and looking at some of the stats, you can actually tell as a manager which team is doing better, what their conversion rates are, and how many orders they're doing, and kind of gauge the capacity in both locations, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's really robust stats, so you can track the materials that you're using in both locations. Maybe you can see different trends. We see different wants and needs from both sides. So we can sort of gear towards different needs based on the location. So that's really helpful. And you asked about, if we had a third location, what would we do there? We would essentially just add a new location and then add the printers available at that location. And then, we're up and running. It's in the same drop down list. Everything's within the same system. So it's super easy to do that. It would take like, 20 minutes to do.
Fantastic. And we talked a little bit about with Felix in terms of automation and the automation level, and we talked about how we gave him a lot of advice or at least recommendations in terms of having an assisted. So I think people know that we're using the assisted level. But let me ask you, why did you choose assisted versus either full auto or manual?
Yeah, so assisted was one feature that we really wanted in there because we do a lot of custom work. So for our process, not everything's super automated. So we get customers from all walks of life, from people just wanting a simple, fidget spinner type of thing to people wanting, 100 parts for their machines. So because of that huge range of operation, we want more control overall. So when the quote comes in, we want to be able to review it and then, sometimes decide if we want to take it or if we want to maybe recommend a different material. There's just so many things that can happen and so many different customers and needs that we want the power to basically look at the job start coming in and then approve it or send some revisions or decline it based on materials needs and all these other things. So assisted gives you the most control, I would say, but at the same time taking away a lot of the monotonous work. So if someone submits like a very simple basic job, that can just be fully auto. You can just hit OK, and basically the whole quoting process is automated, and then the management of the print job is fairly automated as well. And that's the whole point of the system. It takes a lot of the manual work away. But when a big job comes in, you'd want to have a lot more hands-on that, and you can basically manually take that over and communicate with the customer a lot more before accepting like a really large or like numerous part job.
Now, as a manager of tech, you know that workflow and consistency is always being challenged, as in, hey, one day you are running out of certain material, another day a certain printer is down. How do you use AutoQuote 3D to kind of help you manage, what your capacity is, and also what materials available? Like, for example, if red PLA is sold out or gone for some reason, or one of your machines goes down or is fully occupied, how does AutoQuote 3D help you manage capacity and workflow?
Yeah, so it's really easy. When you set up your printers and your materials, you would have already set up all these profiles for every printer and material. So it has the sizing and everything. So if you, for instance, run out of one material, you can essentially just disable that material and then it'll no longer show up as the quoting process where people can choose that option. So you can just, manually disable it for a short time, and then once it's back in stock, you can just enable it again. So it's really convenient and it's real time, so people can't check out accidentally with something that you don't have in stock. And if someone does and you just like didn't notice that you didn't have the stock, you can always go into the quote and then you can always send a revised quote with a different material and then get them to accept it instead. There's a really cool feature where when the job comes in, it's not fully accepted yet unless you choose to accept it. And this allows you a short moment of checking the file to make sure it's both printable and the materials available, or you can hit modify and then send a revision to them so they can accept that instead.
And I don't know if you know on top of your head, but what would you say is the ratio of accepted versus rejected orders? And this could be rough, but what are the reasons why you would reject something?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think off the top of my head, I would say 70% is accepted, which I feel is quite high in general. We don't get a lot of people that are submitting like random things. The ones that are rejected usually are people who are obviously new to 3D printing, and they've sent in something that's just completely unreasonable to print, like really thin walls or like no volume at all. So those ones we'll essentially just reject them, but we'll also send an email and be like, hey, these are the reasons that your part might not be printable. Maybe you want to look at repairing your model. And then, but most of the time, it actually is accepted. I think by the time people choose all the materials and everything, they have a reasonable understanding of 3D printing, that they've chosen the right ones. We have some customers that submit the job and then kind of email us and be like, hey, I don't really know what I'm choosing here. Can you help me? Or people have called in as well and be like, hey, I'm doing your quoting this system, but I'm not 100% sure what system I should choose. And then we just kind of walk them through the selection process on the call. And, even that, it saves a lot of time instead of sort of explaining the whole thing ad hoc to every single person. You're at least in front and they can choose, okay, pick SLA for this part and then pick a color. And then they hit submit and then they can pay. So even if it is a consultation type of process, it does save a lot of time because all the options are in front of them right there.
Have there been any situations where you've reviewed a customer's submission and sent it back and say, hey, I think we should reorient this or do this instead or replace it with this material and we can save you some money? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean that happens quite a bit, and that's one of the main reasons why we use assisted mode, so that we can capture those and then save the customer money. Our whole purpose is to build a good relationship, get return customers. So a lot of times people will send in giant SLA files, and it'll be like really expensive, and then we'll take a look at the file. Sometimes we'll reorientate it, and then maybe we may hollow it out and then send them like a revised quote and be like, hey, this would be a lot more efficient if we hollow it out or if we change the material. Or, in some cases, we'll be like, hey, this part will be very weak if we print it in the FDM process. Maybe you want to consider doing an SLA process. And usually the customers will be very thankful that, if we've reached out, reviewed their product and revised their options.
Fantastic. And I think that good customer service is, key to, what we want to do at Chops3D. But I want to ask, with the system, has it brought you more customers doing PTOs and more interest and more, I guess, engagement within the PTO process?
Yeah, I think it's made it a little bit easier for people to just throw a quote. So previously there used to be a lot of people that would just call and be like, "Hey, I'm interested in getting a 3D print," and then we would basically go through the whole process of explaining it a little bit if they're new, and then they would send a file, and then we would be like, "Oh, this is going to be like way too expensive, or it just doesn't work." What happens now is they'll actually just drop their part into the quoting system, and if it's way too expensive, they'll kind of filter themselves out right away. So we see a lot less of the calls that are like, just not going to be a good fit. But we do see more calls of people asking about, hey, what material is this? And, getting a little bit more information. So I would say we're getting a little bit more qualified leads throughout, and then we're getting more random people going in and sending a job. So we'll just see like for the easy jobs, they'll just appear on our thing. We hit accept and we print the job, and we see new people like that all the time. So we do see a slight increase in new users and a sort of filtered out of the users that are not a good fit, which I think is the whole point of AutoQuote, and it's been fantastic.
And what about some potential customers that, let's say, maybe uploaded a quote but never gone through the whole full checkout process because they didn't commit to the print or they didn't like the price or something? Do you do anything with that list of leads that comes through that for abandoned checkouts?
Yeah, for sure. All the abandoned checkouts go into this handy list that we can actually reach out to again. So if we're low in capacity, we can basically reach out, look at some of the files that are maybe someone submitted like 3 different files, and you could kind of piece together a story like maybe they've been having difficulty or they're trying to find a good price. Those people, we can reach out to them and be like, hey, are you trying to look for something specific, or is there an issue that you're having? And then we can kind of go through and try and convert those like lost sales, if you will, or just troubleshoot to see, hey, what's up? Maybe they're unhappy about the pricing, and then you can adjust that as you go. But yeah, the list of filled orders or quotes are also still very useful. It's also useful seeing what people are uploading, what they're looking to print. So you have some industry intel of like what are people attempting to print, what's popular at the moment. Is it more engineering stuff? Is it more architecture stuff? Like what's happening in the industry?
So, change is always a scary thing for any business. So I want to get your take on this. Do you have any advice for someone who is doing service bureau work, who may be very skeptical of switching from their manual, very refined Excel spreadsheet and going to AutoQuote 3D? What kind of advice, would you give them to maybe take the jump or, maybe not?
I would say, take the plunge for sure. For us, it's saved so much time, and it's time that it's not really useful. So, for the general quoting, we're saving upwards of like 80% of our time, just the touch points with the customer. Because previously, what happens is they'll reach out, we'll have to manually, talk to them and, send emails back and forth and manage their job. Put them in the quoting system, hit the slice and then figure out what the number is, and just to find out that they're like, oh, it's too expensive. So in those kind of jobs, it's saving upwards of 80% of the time of not that valuable kind of work. So it's really automating the really monotonous stuff, and it just allows you more time to consult with the ones that are maybe higher quantities, higher value work. So it just saves a ton of time for basically everyone involved, even job management. Once the part goes through in your payment system, it goes into a separate category where you can flow it into, it's currently printing, and it sends an email when it's currently printing. Whenever you change the status, AutoQuote will automatically send an email and be like, hey, it's printing now. And then once it's done printing, you can change it to, hey, it's ready for pickup or it's ready for shipping. And you don't actually even have to open an email client. So even that, you're saving like a few seconds, a few minutes here and there. But it's just so much more convenient and so much more efficient for us to manage that we can focus on the more important things, like making sure the part comes out right, cleaning up all the supports and all that stuff. There's just way better time to be spent instead of like going back through emails, slicing, and plugging Excel sheets and everything. The algorithm is very robust, so it's simple enough that it's relatively easy to understand, and you can change it so that there's a curve. If it's a big part and it's a lot of weight, it'll be less expensive if they put more stuff. You can customize your startup fees. So we've been able to integrate our costing system into AutoQuote without trouble, without feeling like, oh, we're not as robust in terms of our costing structure.
Okay, I think I know the answer to this, but if AutoQuote 3D was somehow not available again after today, it's not the case. We're just hypothetical situation. If I turn off your AutoQuote 3D and you have to go back to doing things the manual way, what do you think you'll lose from a customer experience standpoint, or how would you have to limit your business in order to compensate for that loss of automation?
Well, I'd lose my sanity first of all. um, I think losing AutoQuote would increase a lot of the workload on our people. Basically, what's the most costly about it is it's distracting. So when you like printing is not our like 100% of what we do. If that is, then maybe it's a little bit different. But it's if a print comes in, it distracts our people, and they have to start to respond to emails, do different tasks, start a different print. So it just injects all these interruptions into our workflow, into our day to day, so that everyone is sort of a little bit more stressed, a little bit more on edge, and it's just tasks that you feel like you should be automated. Like plugging things to an Excel sheet is not exactly fun and useful. You'd rather be like printing or setting up stuff. So I think the biggest hurt would be actually the sanity and sort of the feeling of you're wasting a little bit of time on every single part of the steps. That would be the biggest hurt. But it would, on the bottom line, it will use more hours for our people to contact the customer more. We'd be taking more calls that could really just be an automated thing, or people could just read online. We'd be accepting or rejecting a lot more of the very basic questions. You'd be like, "Hey, I want to print this helmet, and it's going to be like $500," and they're obviously not going to accept that. But there's no way to really mitigate that without a system like AutoQuote, without someone sort of touching that directly.
Absolutely. I, for one, will never, ever, ever miss that call that says, "Hey, do you have my quote yet? I sent the file to you 30 minutes ago." I will never, ever miss that. And that is absolutely sanity going out the window, even after just 24 hours without auto quotes. So, Jacky, I want to thank you for your time today. That's been great insight for someone who's actually operating on the system, using it every day, and driving business forward with AutoQuote3D. So, thank you for joining me, and have a great day.
Thanks. You too.